Hello and welcome to the Tuesday, October 27th meeting of the Finance Committee. Pursuant to the Governor's order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Laws, Chapter 38, Paragraph 20, as well as the Select Board's emergency order dated March 16th, 2020, the Finance Committee will be using remote participation for this meeting. The audio of this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the town's webpage within 24 hours in accordance with the Governor's emergency action requirement of keeping the public informed of actions during this meeting. I would ask that all participants remotely attending this meeting please state your name for identification purposes each time you speak throughout the meeting. This time I will take a roll call of attendance. Mr. Maxwell.
Here.
Mr. Alfred.
Present.
Ms. Zemer.
Here.
Mr. Whitaker.
Present.
Mr. Murphy.
Here.
Ms. Nussessian.
Here.
And of course I am here. We are now called to order. So first up is administrative, and there's really nothing because we don't have minutes to review this week. And I don't know of any transfers or anything that need our attention. So we'll move right along today. As I said, my goal today is to keep it to an hour. So we'll start right away getting into Travis. Any updates from the town administrator?
So I think looking at your agenda, we can cover it at a later point here. The police chief salary, contract was the last department head contract that I needed to take care of after coming in the door. Worked with Tim Maxwell and Ken as the liaisons. And I can update you however the chair would like me to do that later in the meeting. But happy to say that we were able to get him under contract and keep him around, and I can share as much detail as you'd like. Additionally, the updates that we have, I sent out today, and they can, again, be in various parts of the agenda, but moving along with some of the long discussed articles with the select board last night, provided those to you. DLS sent out the Division of Local Services under Mass DOR sent out some guidance last week that was unexpected, I would say, from most municipalities based on the way that they've been indicating they were going to go. It is going to require some cleanup for us to discuss at our fall town meeting. So, we have a little bit of time looking at December, but I think, we need to strategize as a group. In the event that we aren't able to handle that, we're also going to be prepared for the possibility that we don't have, because of COVID, a fall town meeting. I think we need to have a plan in place for both, and I'm happy to discuss that. Had the chance to touch base with Ken a little bit on that, but we can do that tonight or in the next meeting that you have available. Otherwise, we had a very full agenda last night with the select board, but it was, I wouldn't say many finance committee things that I would update on. 555 Hopping Brook is a sort of looming thing that will obviously have financial implications. I know Vin Murphy chimed in last night on the open session. I don't think there's anything I would sort of bring to your attention at this point. It became on the select board's radar last night because they have some traffic updates, and traffic is obviously in the select board's wheelhouse. But otherwise, it's still very much in the planning board realm. And that's all I have from last night. I think everything else can be covered later in the agenda.
Okay, I'm fine with that. Okay, so we'll keep moving. Liaison updates, just from the school side. We didn't meet with them last week, so there's nothing really to update there. Anybody else have any other liaison updates they would like to make? Mr. Maxwell, go ahead.
So just wanted to give a very brief update about the capital subcommittee. Is it appropriate under liaison or? Yeah,
that's fine.
Okay.
It's not really liaison, but yeah, same thing. Similar type of thing.
We've kind of been waiting to see what happens with warrant article 4. I was thinking of getting the subcommittee to start reviewing because our time is starting to run out. One of the other aspects we're considering, Mr. Sparrow had proposed having the capital subcommittee put together a capital report for the meeting. So we're discussing that. If anybody has any thoughts about it, please feel free to let me know. And other than that, we did review the inventory from Dude Solutions and are starting to discuss how do we turn that into something that's more sustainable in terms of our budget.
Okay. Any other liaison updates? Okay. and we'll move on because I think we have some meat later in this agenda. Okay, I saw Chief Cassidy, who's on for the first time in a few weeks. Fortunately, doesn't have a conflict, so we can get an update from him, a long-awaited update on the COVID situation, which we know has not been trending in the right direction recently. So go ahead, Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Chief Cassidy, Emergency Management Director. Yeah, we're up to 136 cases in Holliston since we began tracking back in the spring. We currently have 23 active cases. We have had a designation as a red or high risk category designation from the Department of Public Health for 4 of the last 5 weeks, and we have every expectation that we will keep that red designation when the metrics are published by DPH this Thursday. That's based on a 14-day average of new cases for the 2-week period ending last Saturday. We had in excess of 24 cases through last Saturday, so I expect we're going to stay red for at least another week.
So just, I mean, I understand the confidentiality involved. Are we seeing, and I think you confirmed this at the select board meeting, are we seeing community spread at this point? And should we be reminding residents that, the virus is still out there and we need to be diligent about our behaviors?
We absolutely should be continuing to beat the message that we've been saying for months. Wash your hands, cover your face, keep your distance, avoid crowds. We have community spread. Of those 23 active cases, that consists of 15 unique addresses, and consistent with a lot of communities, a lot of our spread is occurring within households. So one member brings it home and then someone else in the household comes down with it. We've got 5 houses with 2 cases. We have 1 house with 4 cases. None of our active cases right now are in a group home. None of them are in a long-term care facility. None of them are at an elderly housing complex. Every single one of our 23 cases is currently at a single family home.
Okay, so just I'll do my public service announcement. Wear your mask, stay away from everybody else. The sooner we beat this, the sooner we can move on in many respects. So it's been a long haul for everybody, I'm sure, but we have to continue being diligent. Now, one thing I was going to ask you, Chief, is how are we on the PPE situation? And I'm especially putting that in the context of what's happening throughout the rest of the country, right? Massachusetts is seeing a general increase, but as you know, the Midwest is seeing a major increase in the last few weeks. So do we have any PPE risk? Are we making sure we're kind of getting supplied?
Thank you. We have been planning for this second wave of the first surge for months. We have more than adequate supply of PPE on hand, and based on an initiative that I was involved with the Middlesex District Attorney's Office, today I actually went and picked up some additional PPE, which was donated by the Taiwanese Chamber of Commerce office in Boston to organizations that operate ambulances, fire departments, and police departments in the Middlesex County. It was facilitated between the district attorney as well as Congresswoman Clark. And so there was a press conference at noon in Woburn, and we're in good shape with PPE right now.
Okay, so now financially, I know you've been overseeing the COVID expenses. Is this increase in cases causing more COVID requests? In other words, are you seeing Board of Health looking for more money, things like that? I'm just thinking from our perspective, keeping an eye on the money part of this.
Sure. The only expense that the Board of Health to date has requested from CARES funding was approximately $1,000 for increased signage. And that was a few months ago that their board voted that, and that request was approved by the select board. And those A-frame signs have already been purchased and deployed to enhance the visibility of the messaging in public spaces.
Okay, Michelle, I saw you. By the way, don't forget to use the raise hand function, but Michelle, I saw you waving. So you have to unmute.
So last week I talked to Board of Health, and they said that they needed more clerical hours because all of their time is taken up with phone calls having to do with phone calls related to COVID, that they can't get any of their other work done, and that they were going to talk to you about CARES money for their clerical. Have they not talked to you about that?
I have been anticipating a request for additional clerical hours from them for in excess of a month. Multiple meetings, they tell me that they're going to talk to me. I have no formal vote from their board. Therefore, I cannot bring a request to the select board in accordance with the policy that was set up for requesting CARES funding.
Okay.
Okay, Ms. Nersessian? You're muted too.
Sorry about that. Chief, if someone wants to request funding, does it go through you first, or does it need to go to the select board first? Could you just remind me of the process?
Absolutely. And I can follow up by sending the flow chart out that we established a couple of months ago. It's also on the website. If someone wishes to avail themselves of some of the CARES Act and or FEMA funding that is currently available, they need to make that request through me so that I can determine if it is an eligible CARES/FEMA expense. And if it is, then I can advance it to the select board. If they are an independent board, then there needs to be a vote on record. So for example, if the Board of Health wants something like the A-frame signs, we need to have a vote from them before I can bring it to the select board. Same way with Youth and Family Services, when they made some requests, their advisory board made a vote, and then I was able to advance the request to the select board.
But they could go to you first to find out if it would be approved, and then take the vote, and then it moves on.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And
Okay.
I am not just a yes man. I have disappointed departments, boards, committees, and department heads without any sort of discrimination for months. I say no, and it doesn't even go any further, or it comes out of their own budget if they think it's necessary, but it's not appropriate based on the A&F or Treasury guidance.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I was corresponding with Jackie and suggested that she go to you. So I wanted to make sure that the suggestion was correct to start with you. So, all right, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Whitaker.
If I had read that certain communities in the state have been rolled back into the previous phases of quarantine, so to speak, are we in danger of that? And if we are in danger of that, what financial impact might that have? Like, for instance, is Casey's going to have to shut down, and so we lose any tax revenue from that kind of stuff?
Great question. We never advanced to the next stage of the current phase that we're in. Therefore, none of the loosened restrictions. So for example, in step 3, phase 1, it was, and for us still is, maximum of 50 people at an outdoor event. When low risk communities were allowed to go to the next step within the phase, or the next phase within the step, they were able to increase to 100 people at an outdoor event. But for higher risk communities, which we have been and continue to be, they weren't allowed to advance. They've now had this rule in effect long enough that there have been some communities who had been a lower risk community. And then because they were red for 3 consecutive weeks, then they needed to scale back. But for us, we never moved forward to that next part of the phased reopening. So there are no implications. With regards to how this is going to impact specific sectors, as you may have seen in the news last week, there was a 2-week halt on ice hockey at the non-professional or non-collegiate level. So ice rinks that service youth leagues or school leagues were closed for a minimum of 2 weeks. That may not be the only sector that sees rollbacks. As we look at the clusters that are occurring at the state level, Unfortunately, dining is one of the sectors where clusters are tracing increased caseload to. So there is a push at some levels of public health circles to reevaluate indoor dining. But that is, nothing is solid on that. That is just rumors and innuendo at this point. But if we continue to add more and more communities, like right now, there are 77 in the Commonwealth that are designated as red. If that balance tips to a certain level, DPH or the governor may decide that they're going to once again curtail indoor dining.
But Mark, we don't have a meals tax in Holliston, so there wouldn't be a direct, immediate impact to our financials. However, if restaurants, businesses, or whoever went under and they couldn't pay their taxes, and then you would obviously have a sort of follow-on impact from that. But Chief, we're more than likely going to be red again on Thursday.
I was
trying to get some wiggle room, but
you know, a couple weeks ago there was a time where I'm like, we're kind of right on the edge. We could be yellow, we could be red, but no, based on the numbers that we've had in the preceding 2 weeks ending for Saturday, unless there is some new slide rule or accounting method, which is
very possible.
Yeah, we will. So, well, it's just interesting. I mean, we joke about that, but because there was so much pushback around the way the metrics were calculated early on, like communities like us, that the first week we went red, the majority of our cases were at a long-term care facility, and there were communities that the majority of their cases were in a prison. There are some communities where the majority of their cases are at a institution of higher education. And so a lot of those communities complained to the DPH and said, we're getting this red designation, but it's all sort of isolated in one spot. So as of last week, when they published their weekly report, the DPH, they're now adding asterisks for those communities that are high risk due to large case numbers in those three categories. So if you have more than 10 or more cases in one of those three categories, long-term care facilities, education, higher education institutions, or
prisons.
Yes, thank you. Congregate care, prison institution, then you'll still get your red designation if appropriate, but there will be an asterisk denoting that it's
right.
largely tied to a specific type of institution or setting. And also, if those numbers together are 30% or higher of your new cases, that you'll get that asterisk.
So on Thursday, we'll be red again and this will be the third week in a row.
Yes.
Is there anything automatic that gets triggered at 3 weeks in a row?
No. So early on, the DESE guidance was that communities should be evaluating their community risk designation with an eye to its impact on their instructional learning model. But Commissioner Riley just recently came out with revised guidance that says it's not an automatic. You don't need to go fully remote if you're red for 3 consecutive weeks.
Yep. Well, as I emailed you, I do hope we can get some testing in the school, because I understand that, we have very limited information about who the cases are and what. You guys have done a lot of work on that and don't necessarily see spread in the school, but it would be good to get some evidence to back that up, not necessarily because you're just asymptomatic spread is obviously a large portion of this, so you may not know.
Right.
Yeah. Necessarily, unless you test. I mean, and I've been saying this for the entire time. The testing is the key to all this. I understand there's a lot of things around it. There's really more to be dealt with the school committee, but obviously you work hand in hand with them and they listen to you because of your great wisdom. Because you didn't go to that other school across the river in Cambridge. That.
You mean the better one?
But anyway, so that's my spiel there. But when you do have another call with the state, can you ask them why on Green Earth, they on their color coordinated little stoplight thing, They
Oh
have
my
a
God, right?
the trend of positivity, and it's green still. Now you can say that it's still within their whatever their satisfactory bounds. You can make green being like it's still within acceptable limits, but by no means is it on a negative or positive, a green trend.
Trend. It says trend.
It does.
It says
It
trend,
absolutely says trend.
It's not, right? It's not trending. It's not trending green. It's trending red.
Honestly, it's right
Not
there.
only
It's crazy.
nothing
The
about
whole
the state.
report,
That
it makes the whole report
it- it's
it makes the whole report bogus. But then the other thing is, and I don't want to take any more time, I apologize, but has anyone satisfactorily explained to you why it is the acceptable route to look at our positivity rate based upon all tests that are done, even if it's like one person takes 4 tests, rather than just, the number of cases by the number of people I mean, it's just the fact that they're out there, and we've had 5%, 4+% positivity for the last 2 weeks at least, or something like that. And he was up on the governor was up on stage today saying it was 1.6 or 1.9 or under 2%. It just loses all credibility. I mean, today it was 7.5% on the reported cases today, not on the days that they were actually tested, but on the just. But if you look at it back, it's been, at least for the last week, it's been above 5, and more so. So there's no, and there's can you explain that to me? How that makes any sense?
Yeah, so this is a frequent topic of conversation during those conference calls with the Department of Public Health with regards to how those metrics are calculated. And there is a lot of pushback. They chose one methodology, and they're trying to stay consistent so that when you try and chart your numbers, then you're comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges midway through your reporting period for this pandemic. I suspect that should we have another one in a future year, the methodology may be different based on lessons.
But they have all the data. They can go back and recreate it very easily and put together a new chart. They have all the data. Don't give me this BS that they want to keep it all standard. I understand you want to keep it standard, but you have all the data. You can go back and create it.
Regardless, Dan, and we don't want to take up too much time on this, but regardless, the one thing I will say is, even if you stay with the same methodology, there is no positive trend. There is not. The data has not been trending positively for 2 months. So to me, the issue isn't what the absolute value of the data is. The trend line is obvious to anybody who can read a chart. So I don't care what methodology they're using. The data is inaccurate. The assessment of the data is inaccurate when you say it's a positive trend, meaning a beneficial trend versus a negative trend that clearly we're seeing right now. Cases in Massachusetts have jumped by a factor of more than 5 from the low during the summer on a daily basis, and the positivity rate has gone up. I mean, there's nothing that's as good that has been has happened with the data in the last 2 months, and the state is not reflecting that. So anyway, as I said, I don't want to turn this into a Department of Public Health bashing session, but
right. And with regards to testing, Dan, to your point, we've remained pretty consistent with the number of tests that are being taken by Holliston residents. The messaging that I will be sending out tomorrow using the Blackboard platform will be reminding people that they should get a test, and there will be a link to where they can actually get free tests, because the Stop the Spread sites around the Commonwealth are free to Massachusetts residents. So if someone is concerned about not being able to afford a test, at the Stop the Spread sites, which our closest one is Framingham, as long as you're a Massachusetts resident, it is free to you. And there, you do not have to have symptoms. Unlike some healthcare facilities that you go to, they may decline to give you a test if you say, "Oh, I just want to be sure." They will test you at a Stop the Spread site, regardless of whether you have symptoms. And as long as you're a Massachusetts resident, it will be at no cost to you.
Well, I appreciate you doing this. And obviously, I was a proponent of that last week. I don't know if that has anything to do with it. Probably actually didn't have anything to do with it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing it. I know you probably won't be able to, but my recommendation would be to scare the bejesus out of people and tell them that they don't, stop, having their kids all playing together without masks and everything, and all these cases keep popping up. Then we're going to have to close the schools.
The messaging specifically says something along the lines of stop getting together with friends and family.
Yeah. Or the consequences, we can't keep the schools open. I mean, it's gonna, you're gonna have a.
Yeah, it's a pretty bold message, and we're partnering in our messaging with the schools. They also have a role to play because they've got a specific demographic that is listening to them. So we're sort of gonna tag team and have one message build on another.
From an expense
basis. Enough.
Okay.
Can I just ask one question? Is the
well, Sue's been waiting, so let me just get to Sue first. Go ahead, Sue.
I just had a question on what you had brought up, community spread, and just sort of thinking about obviously the cost as it sort of permeates through households. What does that actually mean? Is it people just not wearing masks and that's how it's spreading, or is there like a definition around community spread? Because you brought the term up, Ken, and then the chief then explained sort of the number of households, et cetera. So I just was wondering what that actually meant.
Sure, great question. So the CDC defines community spread as the disease being transmitted in the community without individuals necessarily knowing how they contracted it. So unlike a cluster where when we have a sports team and through contact tracing, you figure out, oh, my kid got it from that other kid on their hockey team, or when a whole bunch of people at a workplace all come down with it. That's a cluster. When the public health investigator, through an informational interview, talks to a person who's gotten a positive test, and they walk back through their contacts, and they, for the life of them, cannot figure out where they picked it up, that's the definition of community spread.
Does it have anything to do with, so for example, I go to Orange Theory and I wear my mask the whole time, other people don't? Is it whether you're wearing a mask or not and you can't figure it out, or it doesn't matter if you had a mask on, you just don't, you have no idea?
Yeah, so through the contact tracing, they'll ask you about your behavior, and that will more help inform them who they may need to follow up on. Like if you've been a little more lax and maybe you got together with another couple in your neighborhood and you were sitting around the fire pit and having some adult beverages and you weren't wearing your mask, that would help them know who they needed to follow up on and say, hey, you may have been a close contact with this individual. But in terms of the reverse contact tracing, they are really blind to, what was your habit prior to either getting symptoms or getting the diagnosis or the positive testing. So it's not a case of I was vigilant and I always wore my mask.
Is good. Okay.
Yeah. It's more likely that the easy way to put it is you don't have an obvious clue where you got infected. That's what community spread basically means.
Okay, that's helpful. I was just trying to figure it out for how it was described here. So thank you.
Okay, Michelle, you had a comment?
Wanted to know if the testing site in Framingham is drive-through.
It is at the Walsh Middle School, and they moved it there when Keefe Tech went back into more of an in-person learning model. So yes, I believe Walsh Middle School is a drive-through location.
Thank you.
Okay. Mark's nodding his head, so it's okay. So I'd like to move on from this. Anything else for the chief? Okay, thank you very much, Chief.
Thank you.
And keep up the good work. And let's everybody, this should be a very good reminder to everybody, be diligent. Okay, so next is the FY21 budget. And Travis, do you want to comment? I know you have some things for this, so we'll start the discussion there.
Sure. So again, are we going to want to go into executive session at the end? And I'll just go high level right now.
Yeah, we could just go high level right now. We'll go in because I assume that issue is not 100% resolved, so we can't talk about it in public yet, right?
Right. So I would just say, we discussed the impact of the HPA contract a couple meetings ago. That there's going to be an impact from the Chief Stone contract that we can discuss. Obviously, briefly discussed it with the liaisons to let them know. We feel at the moment that as the 21 budget is constituted for the police, that we are still within that. But there are obviously, as Chief Cassidy was just indicating, quite a few things that are still unknown of how this is all going to play out. So we believe that that budget is still good, but I can get into the details of where that negotiation is and how it's progressed. Additionally, I would say specific to your agenda item here is written for 21 budget as voted in July. I would say that the two categories that I'm sort of not necessarily are an issue at the moment, but I'm anticipating will be our unemployment, which I touched on last week. I think at this point, as we look forward, I think one of the things that this group is going to talk about is the best way to make sure that we have flexibility and protect ourselves in the event that the state does not get its act together with the DUA, the Department of Unemployment Assistance, that, if the fraudulent claims don't get cleared off of our billing by the end of the year, we're going to have to potentially be prepared for that. So that's one that I'm tracking. I think we can discuss as we get closer to 12/5, the town meeting. And the other one is illegal. And I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier that the 555 Hopping Brook is sort of a big animal. I think it's safe to say that we're probably going to have to lean on legal. We've already begun that process a little bit. Additionally, because we're probably going to be at the table with HPA at least twice within the fiscal year, which I don't think, obviously was on Jeff Ritter's radar when he put together the select board budget, that we may just want to be prepared for legal costs associated with that. We did not bring Labor Council to the table with the HPA. We did that ourselves, but obviously everything that we do, we're running by Labor Council to protect ourselves in the town. And so, being prepared for that, I think we're going to have to look at where the legal budget stands between now and the end of the year. Again, it's not dire at the moment, but it's just, as your agenda says, where we are with the 21 budget. Those are things I think we're going to need to discuss. Otherwise, I had given that Q1 update. I don't think I got any specific questions after that. If there are any, I think the ones that I just touched on were included on that list, so I'm not sort of giving any new information there. I think that's it for under the 21 budget.
Okay. So let's move on to the one I think will garner a lot of conversation, which is the warrant for the town meeting. And I'll preface this by saying that, as I said, I want to try to keep this to an hour, so I want to reserve at least like 10 minutes for executive session. So we'll try to get this done in the next 17 minutes or so we can get the executive session in. So go ahead, Travis, start the discussion.
Okay, so the way the DLS's message came out last week is essentially on page 2 of our tax rate recap is that we are going to have to reflect the state aid as it's coming in, regardless of the fact that it is not final. So at this point, we are locked in to entering into page 2 of the tax rate recap. Just for anybody who doesn't know, the tax rate recap is where we put in all of the information that we get certified at town meeting, all of our financials essentially that put together the budget, revenue, and expenditure. And page 2 is it populates essentially based on the state aid that we receive. The understanding was sort of this year, everybody, the state did not give cities and towns guidance and was going to let towns be a little bit flexible. And that is clearly not the case. That direction came out. Page 2 is going to populate based on where the cherry sheet revenues are voted through, which is the governor's, which I shared with you last week, I think.
Yeah.
That means that to keep the budget in the spirit of how it was voted at town meeting, we are going to need to do some housekeeping potentially at the 12/5 town meeting. And if we aren't, we're going to have to, sit down and discuss that as a group and how we'd like to handle that and work with DLS. Sorry,
Right.
Ken, go ahead.
No, I just want to let you finish, but just to explain it a little further, expound on that a little further. When we construct our budget model, as you know, in a normal year, non-pandemic year, we go to May town meeting with a model for local aid and the offsets and charges, and then we finalize that. Usually the state budget is final by the time we get to October, and usually we're pretty close, right? So there's just a little bit of cleanup we have to do And it's not even necessary to do cleanup in many years because it's so small it doesn't really matter. The difficulty we have this year is that we modeled the local aid cut. The state is, in spite of the fact that they still can't, they still don't have any means of actually achieving a balanced budget, is claiming that they're going to keep local aid flat. And what DLS's guidance basically, or order is, so to speak, is that they're not going to let us fill out the tax rate recap. And for anybody who doesn't know the recap, what that form basically does is sets the tax rate, right? So what DLS is basically saying to us is, you built a budget with a local aid assumption. We're not going to let you put on the tax rate recap what you assumed. We're going to force you to put in what the governor is proposing, even though the budget is not final and has not been approved by the Senate or the House. And there is some leeway in the sense that they say, hey, if you've got it done already, you don't have to change it. But at the minute the state passes a budget, you have to put the numbers in that were in that they approve. The difficulty we have is that, and that most communities have, is the tax rate is set late in the year for obvious reasons, right? So even if we were to say, well, we can go with what we have, the minute the state passes a budget, if they do that in December, then we have to refile, it delays tax bills. So the smarter thing to do from our side is to look at the tax rate recap as, okay, if we put in the number that the governor has, that ensures us that even if a budget is passed between when we fill out the form and when we get it approved, that we can set the tax rate in time. The summary of all that is, we have to reconcile or allocate the difference in local aid between what we were modeling and what they're telling us we must use. That's really what it comes down to. So that introduces a whole bunch of things because, and Travis and I have been talking about that, coming up with kind of plans for that, and that's what we'll be discussing. My plan, just from a timeline perspective, is the plan that we need to make sure that any articles we need to deal with this problem are on the warrant when it's closed. So that's what I was talking to Travis about earlier today, making sure we have all the articles we need to deal with this. The actual decision of what we're going to do to deal with this will be part of our decision on November 10th. And the reason for that is because it's going to factor into what we recommend for warrant articles and everything else. So tonight, we're not going to solve the problem, but we want to make sure everybody understands what the problem is so that we're ready to discuss it in context. Go ahead, Vin.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand what we need to do. So if we don't do anything, and I know we have to, we're going to end up with more revenue than we had originally assumed because our cherry sheets, our revenue from local aid is higher.
No.
Is that correct?
No, it's kind of correct, but not really the way of thinking about it. The way of thinking about it is this. The way the tax rate is set is essentially you look at all the spending that was approved.
Yep.
Right? And you look at all the revenue you have that's not tax-based, like local aid and things like that. And then you say, okay, the difference is what you have to raise and appropriate, you voted to raise and appropriate through taxation, right? So in essence, what happens is if we do nothing, then you will see a giant drop in the tax rate this year, but that will be cause all sorts of ramifications.
What ramifications?
Well, the major one is that it will represent, give us excessive capacity next year that will have adverse effects on our operating budget. And I can't go into those in open session. I can discuss those privately because they concern things like contracts and stuff like that.
Okay.
You whipsaw the taxpayer a little too much. It wouldn't. It
Right.
would be, and frankly, we need to restore stabilization and other things. And
Correct. Okay. Go ahead, Travis.
I would just say at a high level, I think we have the ability to do something that I think the Finance Committee was talking about. I know Dan and Sue were interested in terms of pursuing what was previously Article 5, which is, intentionally impacting the tax rate through the article, right? I think the way that we sort of come about this can get to that point as well, which is that we can, calculate this to benefit the taxpayer through the COVID crisis and sort of get that done, but also keep us on track with sort of the financial policies that the Finance Committee has set up. And again, stay within the spirit of how the budget was established in July, but just sort of addressing some of the realities of what the state has chosen to do in a number of different regards that have left people a little bit surprised.
No,
so I would just, if I could just go through timeline too, because I know you just touched on it. So I sat down with Sharon and Mary and Kathy. And so the timeline that Ken was describing is sort of how we need to prep between now and December 5th. And again, this conversation, there are certain ways we can go. But at the same point, if we were to pull off a 12-5 town meeting, the way that I would see this, if there is sort of fixes, as Ken was saying, it's happened in the past when assumptions come in a little bit differently. What we could be looking at is a warrant set up for 12-5 that accomplishes what we're broadly talking about, and we'll get into detail on in the future. If the tax rate hearing opens on November 30th, so before town meeting, the valuation process that the assessors need to go through, because we're in a tri-annual cert, could begin on November 30th. We would then have town meeting on that Saturday, 12-5, to potentially get some of the fixes that we're talking about accomplished. And then we could close the tax rate on 12-7, the hearing, get that to DLS, get our tax rate set on time, get bills out by the statute, and to the printer by the week of 12/14 and in the mail. And it is a very tight schedule. And I won't tell you that is not stressing finance staff out, but I think it's doable. And I think, between now and when we sort of get through this warrant discussion, I think we can do it, so long as, we check all the boxes.
Right. And so for tonight, what I wanted to point out, I think is important for the committee to understand is what I told Travis to add to make sure we had articles for to take to the select board, basically, because obviously the select board adds it to the warrant, is to basically the equivalent of Article 1 of last year, which is an article that allows us to make budget changes, right? And another article that allows us to change the wage table if we choose to restore, we had talked about a 1% guideline for salaries. I told them put it in there to give us the option to do something there. So I think those were the only two, right? Did we everything else is already covered by the existing warrant, correct, Travis?
I believe.
Yeah. So I just wanted to let you know that's the heads up. That's kind of what Travis and I came to the conclusion today. We need to add those two just to give us maximum flexibility. Okay, Michelle.
What happens if we can't have a town meeting?
Then we have problems.
So I would say what's going to, there are some things that we'll have to discuss in terms of changing other assumptions that went into the budget that was set, or the revenue, specifically the assumptions, right? So state aid is what came in about $1.8 million higher than this budget was built off of. There are other things that generally get tweaked between the time that you have your annual town meeting and the time you set your tax rate, overlay being one of them. Also local receipts, if anything sort of changes. So there's state aid, local receipts in this town. I think Dan Alford mentioned earlier, we don't have meals tax and those types of things. Local receipts that we plan for, like motor vehicle excise, they're sizable. They make an impact, but there's not a lot of room there to sort of make any significant adjustments. So if we were not to have a special town meeting, we'd be looking at probably unused levy capacity in the $1.5 million range. And that is sort of the discussion that Mr. Alford and the chair had earlier.
So my recommendation would be that if we have real concerns over the health, I would recommend that the select board lower the quorum. We strip out pretty much everything that isn't needed to set the tax rate and to do sort of the utmost thing, a few things that we need to do, and see if there's a way that we can do that. That would just be my, not even do capital, keep all, I mean, really just strip it completely down to just what needs to basically be done for the tax rate almost.
Yeah.
But that would be,
Yeah, that's obviously a conversation I have to have, but yes, that's what I was going to say. Like my feeling would be the same thing, right? We need to have some kind of town meeting to do this tax rate setting exercise. So, I agree. If we end up reducing the quorum, we should be going to a bare minimum. What we determine bare minimum is arguable, what you feel that is, but I'm just saying that, yeah, I'd be in favor of a reduced quorum.
But you can't say people can't come to town meeting.
No, but
no,
if they know there's nothing on it that actually, there's no, there's no bylaw changes from governance committee. There's
right.
no,
You're right. If there's nothing like that, if it's just housekeeping, then you're right. I mean, anybody could come, but I think you could, and we're getting ahead of ourselves here in the sense that, we should, we have to discuss the problem. This is why, now this is the reason, by the way, why I said I didn't want to go into the financial breakdown tonight, only because it's important to know this, because as we go through the warrant, when it's closed this week and we get it on November 10th for review and recommendation, we'll have this as an additional lever, so to speak, right? We have free cash, we have, so I just wanted everybody to be aware of that. Now, I will tell you, and as I alluded to earlier, I've been working with Travis, and I've actually talked to Dan a little bit about, we've been trying to come to a plan to say, can we come up with a framework for how we restore. There are ways to restore things. Remember, we cut a bunch out to make that budget work. So my first advice to Travis was the first thing we do, if the state is saying you got to plan for this money, is restore everything back to where we thought it would be. Put the money back to capital to get the allocation back up to 2 million. And restore stabilization. Things like that.
And match operating things that we use the operating budget for. The capital set aside, the money that we took out of stabilization was to supplement operating, stuff. Use that to line the sources up correctly, like we would have done before.
Right. That. So it'll use some of that money to do that, and then the discussion becomes how you do the rest. And as I said, I'll defer that discussion because there's more work that has to be done there. But I can tell you that on November 10th, when we start our discussion about the warrant, I will come in and I will present hopefully what we've all agreed, what Travis and I have, Travis is working on some of the details, but we just had a discussion today about a lot of this. So we're going to try to get a concrete plan, and then I'll send it out. I'll send it out ahead of the 10th, but I'm saying we'll have the discussion in our open session on the 10th. So, and then people can chime in, tweaks, adjustments, yes, no, that kind of thing. So, okay. Anything else warrant-wise? That's the big warrant thing for today, right, Travis?
Yeah, so I sent, again, what was previously the meat and potatoes of the warrant, and now we have this, sort of, significant thing to make sure we handle. But again, it is to a certain extent housekeeping. It's just housekeeping that is COVID intensive.
Are there any other articles you're anticipating? I mean, we're 3 days from it closing.
I know that the governance committee meets Thursday. I'm not anticipating the article that they discussed with you personally, but I don't have a final. Everybody has until the 30th. The resident that I had been talking to, I do not anticipate that coming forward. I did get a request. I asked Youth and Family Services had asked something apparently that had been discussed, and again, this was before I got here, but it was for a grant writer related to going after a substantial federal grant that I think communities in our area have gotten. I think that it had support and then got removed because of COVID. So I just asked that if they would like to pursue that on this warrant, that they re-vote it, and they did that. I gave that to the select board, but we didn't really have time, or they didn't have time to read all the backup on it. So they didn't take action on it last night.
But that could be Article 1, right?
I asked them to talk to Chief Cassidy about that, to see if maybe that could be funded through CARES.
Okay.
And also that could be done in Article 1 if we had to as a budget adjustment.
Exactly. That's why I told Travis to restore to put in an article to allow us to do budget adjustments. So.
Yep. So I think, a couple of those moving parts, but other than that, to the answer the question of what's I expect before now and the 30th, if I got nothing, I would not be surprised.
Okay.
And so I've sent you essentially what they voted that they're comfortable with on the warrant, and I've provided the backup to that. So if at any point, we're ready to discuss, I think at this point, the way that I discussed it with Ken is that would start on the 10th, and I'll be prepared to answer any questions at that point. I think if you read through any of that material and the ones that I've already provided and you want to reach out ahead of time, feel free to do that. I'd be happy to discuss, and that way be more prepared to knock those out quickly, because we'll obviously have a lot to cover on the 10th. And then at the same point, if anybody feels like staff beyond myself would be necessary for those conversations, let's sort of tee that up so I can be sure to coordinate who you'd want to hear from.
Yeah, that was basically going to be my message, is make sure you read over what he sent today. I'm sure people will have questions on some of the material that was sent. Get them to Travis ahead of time so that we can have answers on the 10th.
Okay.
So, okay. Anything else, Travis?
Nope.
Okay, good. Then what I would say is...
you want the motion to...
Yeah, I would say let's have a motion to enter executive session for the purpose of discussing contract negotiations with non-union personnel.
So
Which we won't return.
From which we will return.
From which we will not return to open session. Thank you for reminding me of that.
So moved as amended.
Second.
Okay, this requires, as everything does, a roll call vote. Mr. Maxwell?
Yes.
Mr. Alfred?
Yep.
Ms. Zemer?
Yes.
Mr. Whitaker?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Ms. Nersessian?
Yep.
And I vote yes. Okay, so that concludes the public portion of today's meeting. For the meeting of December, December, I'm getting ahead of myself here. October 27th, 2020. Thank you for joining us. As you heard, we were going to enter executive session from which we will not return to open session. So for those of you who may be watching, this is the conclusion of our meeting. So thank you and good night.